Jones. We pray together. Dear God, we thank you for this moment. We thank you for this time that you've been able to give us to go into your word. So God, I ask that as you work on us, work on me. God, let this text minister to our spirits and get us to know you just a little bit better. We ask these things in your son, Christ Jesus' name I pray. And all the people of God said, amen. I didn't ask for this. The day was January 10th, 1957. 60 black ministers and activists gathered in Atlanta. Not for a banquet, not for a revival, but for a movement. Church, they weren't just preachers, they were freedom fighters. They weren't just messengers of the gospel, but they were missionaries of justice. And the question was on the table was both simple and seismic. It was simple, it was who will lead them. You would think the answer was obvious. You would think in this moment, someone like Martin Luther King Jr., he'll rise up, square his shoulders back and declare, here I am, send me. But no, this Martin was in a different place. This Martin wasn't looking for leadership, but leadership was looking for him. This Martin wasn't chasing purpose, but purpose came knocking. This Martin wasn't auditioning for destiny, but destiny had already casted him. And if we're being honest, some of us weren't looking for these assignments that God called us to either. We weren't signing up for battles to fight. We weren't signing up for burdens to carry, but purpose has a way of pulling on you when you least expect it. Because the truth of the matter is that when God calls, you don't get to send it to voicemail. Those 60 preachers saw something in Martin that he hadn't seen yet in himself. They didn't ask him. They called him to lead what would become the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. And do you know what he said? The first time they asked him, he said no. Not because he didn't care, not because he didn't believe in the cause, but because he was tired. Church, he was already preaching nationally. He was already navigating death threats. He was already the pastor of Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. He was already navigating being in the public eye. And somebody in the sanctuary on this morning knows what it's like to receive a calling that you didn't ask for. You never signed up to be the strong one. You never planned to be the glue to hold everyone together. You never asked for the weight, but the weight found you anyway. And church is heavy because it's heavy knowing that people look to you when you can barely look after yourself. It's heavy when the demands never stop. It's heavy when you're standing in the position you never lobbied for. And it's frustrating because no matter how hard it gets, you know God called you to it. So my question this morning is, what do you do when the weight of your calling feels unbearable? How do you respond when the same yes that others are celebrating is the same yes that is draining you? How do you carry a call from God when it feels heavier than your own capacity? Here's the reality. God's promises come with pressure, but our full obedience to God in the moments of frustration determine whether we walk in God's grace or face God's judgment. Matter of fact, that's my sermon in a sentence, that although God's purpose will come with pressure, our full obedience to the obedience of God in the moments where we feel pressure show whether we live in the grace of God or face the judgment of God. As we turn our attention to the text, we find Moses in a familiar but yet frustrating place. He's standing in front of people who don't appreciate him, people who don't listen to him, people who don't understand the weight that he carries. In church, Moses is tired. But church, let us not forget how we got here, because Moses, like many of us, has a calling that he never asked for. He was just a shepherd in Midian, hiding from his past when God interrupted his peace and said, go back to Egypt and tell Pharaoh to let my people go. And because he said yes that one time, he's been on this roller coaster of both miracles and misery. He stands before Pharaoh 10 times and the people still doubt him. He leads them through the Red Sea and they say, Moses, did you bring us out here to die? He goes up a mountain to talk to God. And by the time he comes down, they're worshiping a golden calf. Every time they complain, he intercedes. Every time they rebel, he covers them. Every time they turn on him, he still shows up. And here we go again. Moses, we're tired. Moses, we don't have no water. Moses, why did you even bring us here? He's frustrated, he's exhausted, and he's simply over it. And if past problems of leading people who are fickle wasn't enough, it is here at the beginning of Numbers 20, we find that Moses is wrestling with a harsh reality. Moses, church, has lost his sister. And I want to let you know that's not a passing detail. That's not just a footnote in our story. Miriam's death is monumental. Miriam wasn't just Moses' sister. She was his protector, his covering, his co-laborer in the work of the Lord. When Pharaoh issued a death sentence on Hebrew baby boys, it was Miriam who stood and watched as their mother placed Moses in a basket. It was her who stood and orchestrated his rescue, ensuring that he'll be raised in the palace, but never forget where he came from. But now, church, she's gone. And here's what makes this so heavy. Moses doesn't even get time to grieve. There's no moment to sit in sorrow, no pause to process his pain. He barely has time to breathe before the people start complaining. And that's how frustration finds him, church, not just because the people are murmuring, but because grief and pressure are colliding in the same moment. He's mourning the loss of his sister, but the people don't care about that. They don't see the man, they only see his mantle. They don't see the hurt, they only see his help. They don't see the burden, they only see the blessing that they're trying to receive. So now Moses, at the intersection of both grief and responsibility. And if we're honest, many of us have been there too, because somebody in the sanctuary knows what it feels like when life hits you with loss, but work still calls. When heartbreak is fresh, but deadlines still loom. When you're holding back tears, but people still expect you to lead, to serve, and to pour, and you find yourself frustrated with your call and running on fumes. But I believe this text shows us 4 truths that are critical to us living in the grace of God and not in the judgment of God. The first truth about frustration that I believe we see in this text is that frustration can make you forget. Let the church say frustration can make you forget. Let's turn our attention to verse 5. The people are standing in front of Moses, frustrated, fed up, and out of faith. And they say, why did you bring us up out of Egypt to this terrible place? It's no grain, figs, grapefruit, or pomegranate, and there's no water to drink. Now, when I first read this text, I had to hold up because on surface, this sounds like a reasonable complaint. I mean, they're in the wilderness. It's hot. It's dry. Somebody's lips probably cracked. Their throats are parched. Their skin is sunburnt and their feet are tired. But here's the problem. This ain't their first time in a dry place. This ain't their first time feeling thirsty. This ain't their first time facing what feel like lack. And yet, instead of looking back and remembering how God made a way before, instead of trusting the one who split Red Seas in 2, they start complaining, not for money, not for opportunities, but he also rained manna from heaven. And instead of praising God who turned their bitter waters into better waters, they do what they do best, they complain. Can I push it on this morning? Because before we get too quickly to judge the Israelites, we got to be real for a second, because some of us have the same version of spiritual amnesia. God delivered us before. God has healed us before. God has provided for us before. God has shown up for us before. But the moment we hit a dry place, we start acting brand new like God didn't already prove himself. Let me take it a step further. Come down your pew this morning. Some of us have caught a flat tire, and suddenly we start hollering, "The Lord has forsaken me." I guarantee you, if I was in kids' view and viewpoint and the Wi-Fi went out for 10 minutes, the kids would have said, "Lord, how long must I suffer?" Some of y'all direct deposit will be 2 hours late, and you pacing the floor talking about, "Father, do you not care if I perish?" Because the truth of the matter is sometimes we are just like the Israelites because we love to testify about the Red Sea when we're on the other side of it. We love to talk about the miracle once we've received it. We love to declare he's a way maker once we're already out. But what do you do when you're still in the wilderness? What do you do when the water hasn't flowed yet? What do you do when you're standing in the heat waiting for breakthrough, still dealing with dryness? It's my belief that this is here where frustration sets in. And this type of frustration is dangerous, church, because it doesn't just attack your patience, it attacks your perspective. When you're frustrated, your vision gets blurry. You stop seeing through the lens of faith and start seeing through the filter of fear. You start seeing problems bigger than promises. You start seeing lack when it used to be provision. You start believing the lie that this is a brand new battle when in reality it's just a new location with an old test. Because the real test of this text isn't whether there's water. The real test of this text is whether they still trust the source. This was bigger than just water, church. This was about trust. And I came to tell somebody who's been struggling that this is not a new test. It's the same test, but a different season. The same test, but a different location. The same test, but with different people. The same test, but wrapped up in new challenges. And I know somebody under the sound of my voice may feel like they've been walking through the same struggle over and over and over again. But I know you're wondering, God, how much longer and how much do I have to take? But hear me, this is not a new test. This is not your first time in a dry place. This is not your first time where you had to wait on God. This is not the first time you wonder how you were going to make it. But can I encourage you for 1 second that if he did it before, he can do it again. It's the same God, same test. Same God, same test. Same cancer, same God. Same bills, same God. Same issues, same God. Just nudge your neighbor and say, same God, same test. Same God, same test. But not only does frustration make you forget, but frustration will show you what you haven't outgrown. Church, I had to be frank with you on this morning that frustration doesn't just expose problems, it exposes you. It doesn't just reveal what's happening around you, it pulls back the curtain and helps you see what isn't resolved in you. And the real question is, what has frustration been trying to show you about yourself? Because frustration, church, is like an x-ray. It doesn't create fractures. It simply reveals them. It doesn't manufacture weakness. It just highlights the areas where your faith is under construction. You don't believe me? Just watch this. You thought you had patience until your coworker tried you. Some of us thought we were healed until we saw that name pop up in our phone. You thought you had faith until God didn't move on your timeline. And just like Moses thought he had outgrown his temper, but the right pressure at the wrong time showed that anger still had a hold of him. In our text this morning, God told Moses to speak to the rock, but his frustration made him strike it instead. And here's the catch. This wasn't the first time he had done it. Back in Exodus 17, God actually told him to strike the rock. But this time, church, God wanted him to do something new. And Moses went back to what worked before instead of trusting what God said now. And isn't this like some of us? How many of us have tried to use an old strategy, trying to handle yesterday's problems with today's methods? You kept handling conflict like you did when you were younger because that's how you survived back then. Some of us kept building walls instead of boundaries because rejection taught some of us that nobody can be trusted. You kept trying to force a breakthrough in an area that God already gave you the authority to speak to, and you're frustrated. Because frustration will have you swinging at things you're supposed to speak to. It will have you reacting in ways that God already told you to outgrow. It will have you repeating old habits, reliving old cycles, and holding on to attitudes that keep you from moving forward. Because frustration isn't just about what's happening around you, it's about what's happening in you. And for Moses, this wasn't new. He had a pattern of letting frustration get the best of him. In Exodus 2, his anger led him to kill an Egyptian. He let his emotions dictate his actions, and it sent him to exile for 40 years. In Exodus 32, he got so frustrated with the people that he broke the tablets God had given him. And here now in Numbers 20, he sits and lets his anger take over himself once again and disobeys God. One biblical scholar put it like this. He said Moses' response at Meribah was not just anger, it was about trust. His actions revealed after all these years, he struggled to rely on God's way rather than his own instincts. In translation, church, Moses had outgrown Egypt. He had outgrown Pharaoh, but he hadn't outgrown his own anger. And I've got to ask you on this Sunday morning and get up in your business, consider me nosy, what haven't you outgrown? Some of us may have outgrown the relationship, but you haven't outgrown the bitterness. Some of us may have outgrown the job, but we haven't outgrown the insecurity. Some of us may have outgrown the toxic friendship, but you haven't outgrown the trust issues. And Moses was standing at the doorway of the promised land, but frustration cost him his entrance. He let old habits in a new season block what God is trying to do next. And I came to tell somebody on this Sunday morning that you, my friend, have to grow today. Because frustration will always expose what's controlling you. If you don't deal with it, you will keep repeating cycles instead of stepping into promise. And that's why some of us on this Sunday morning feel stuck. You're living in repeat mode. You have different relationships, but same issues. Some of us have been at different churches and still have the same complaints. Some of us have different jobs and some of the same frustration. Because just like Moses, when frustration rises, we don't step forward, we fall back. See, the truth is, we default to what we know. We drift back to what's familiar, even when we know it's unhealthy, because it's what's easiest to return to what's comfortable than to trust God. Here's the big idea. We repeat the patterns of the past because we don't want change. Because growth requires trust, and trust, church, requires release. But I hear God speaking through the text today to say, I want to do something new, but I can't bring you into a new season with the old mindset. And I came to tell somebody that this is bigger than just behavior modification. This church is about spiritual maturity. Spiritual maturity means trusting God's voice over our own emotions. It means choosing obedience over reactions. It means breaking cycles instead of repeating it. Because just because it worked doesn't mean it's what God wants now. Just because it was effective in one season doesn't mean it belongs in the next. So let me ask you once again, are you still striking things God told you to speak to? Are you still trying to force your way through God, what God is making your faith for? Are you still holding on to what you should have left behind? Because I've made up in my mind that I refuse to go back to old when God's telling me to new. And I don't know about you on this morning, but I came to tell somebody that I'm not gonna miss my miracle. So if that means losing numbers, you gotta let it go. If that means losing attitudes, you gotta let it go. If that means losing comfort, you gotta let it go. If that means losing approval, you gotta let it go. If that means losing excuses and distractions and what's familiar, you gotta let it go. Because what you give up in the now, God's gonna give it in the next. But not only does frustration make you forget, and not only does frustration will reveal what you haven't outgrown, but frustration will fool you. Come on, church, take this walk with me. Frustration will have you believing the wrong story. Frustration will have you thinking that as long as it worked, God is pleased. But in this text, Moses teaches us that you can be effective and still in error. Here in verse 11, I believe this is where the theological tension of the text is. The people needed water. God made Moses a clear instruction, speak to the rock. But Moses' frustration, out of frustration, Moses struck the rock instead, but water still flowed. The people still got what they needed. It looked like success, but God wasn't pleased. And here's the principle, church. Just because it worked doesn't mean it was right. Moses, like some of us, let his emotions get the best of them. He was fed up with these people, frustrated with their complaints, and in his anger, he ignored instruction and relied on the old method. God told him to speak, and he struck. And now that's how frustration has fooled some of us. It makes us think that as long as the product is good, the process doesn't matter. But God doesn't want results, he wants righteousness. God doesn't want you to just win, he wants you to win his way. Let's be real on this morning. How many of us have done the same thing? You did it your way and it worked out. So you assumed that meant God was pleased. You manipulated your way into a blessing. And when it came through, you convinced yourself that it must be God. You cut corners, ignored wise counsel, and you still got the outcome you wanted. So you assumed that it meant that you was in alignment. But let me help you on this Sunday morning. If you only focus on the product and not the process, you will always be out of purpose. I'm gonna say it again, that if you only focus on the product instead of the process, you will always be out of purpose. We can see this play out in our own lives. You can cheat on the test and still pass the class. You can take a shortcut at work and still get the promotion. You can manipulate people and still get what you want. You can reject correction and see temporary success. But what I need you to take hold of on this Sunday morning is that just because it worked doesn't mean it's right. And just because you got results doesn't mean God was in it. That's why we have to be careful to not mistake God's grace for God's approval. You see, church, this morning, Moses got results, but he also got consequences. Because frustration will have us moving based off emotion instead of instruction. Moses was tired of people complaining, tired of carrying the weight of leadership, tired of dealing with the same issues over and over and over again. And out of frustration, once again, he disobeyed God. And that's how some of us get so caught up. We make permanent decisions based off temporary emotions. We quit the job not because God told us to leave, but because we were frustrated. We end relationships not because it was time, but because we were tired. We lash out, we walk away, we take matters into our own hands, not because it's right, but because we're frustrated. And the problem with frustration is it makes you feel justified in your disobedience. Let me give you a practical example. Maybe I'm the only one, but has anyone ever went to the grocery store hungry? If you haven't, I'm going to give you the play-by-play. You walk in trying to get one thing, and because your appetite is louder than your discipline, you end up grabbing things you don't need. You bought snacks you didn't pay for. You got desserts against your diet. You spent more money than you attended. And by the time you got home, you realized half of what you got wasn't even necessary. Now, just in case you're wondering, why does this phenomenon happen? I got the answer. Because you let your hunger lead you instead of your wisdom. And that's how frustration goes, church. It makes you react instead of obey. It makes you do things in the moment that you'll regret in the future. But church, I came on spiritual assignment today to tell somebody to draw the line in the sand and say, this is the last day. Frustration will push me to do something God never told me to do. This is the last day my emotions will run the show. This is the last day my appetite for quick results will override my obedience to God process, because my Bible tells me that they that wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. That means that when you wait, you get stronger. That means when you wait, you'll mount up wings like eagles. That means when you wait, you can run and not get weary. That means when you wait, you can walk and not get faint. Come what may, your answer is to wait, wait on the Lord. But church, not only does frustration make you forget, not only does frustration show you what you haven't outgrown, not only does frustration fool you, but lastly, church, frustration can make you forfeit your future. Let us turn our attention to verse 12. God tells Moses, because you did not trust me enough to honor me as holy in the sight of the Israelites, you will not bring the community into the land I give them. After years of leading, after standing before Pharaoh, after watching God work miracles, one moment of frustration made Moses miss his promise. Church, here's the lesson, simple. Obedience is not about what you did yesterday. It's about the yes that you give today. Moses had been faithful, but when frustration hit, he stopped trusting and started acting on emotion. And if we're not careful, we'll do the same thing, reacting instead of obeying, moving in feelings instead of faith, forfeiting our future because we're too frustrated to trust. But all I came to tell somebody in this little message is don't let frustration don't let frustration make you miss what God has for you. Because my Bible tells me something simple, and it goes a little something like this. It says, we are hard pressed on every side, but not crushed. We're perplexed, but not in despair. We're persecuted, but not abandoned. We're struck down, but not destroyed. In translation, when pressure is heavy, and even when life is squeezing, even when you feel like giving up, my God still has a plan. So in translation on this morning, you may be frustrated, but you're not finished. You may be weary, but you're not defeated. You may be tired, but you're not out of strength. You may be struggling, but you're not stuck. You may be pressed, but you're not powerless. You may be hurting, but you're not hopeless. Because the fact is that you're still here, and it's only by the grace. It's only by the grace of God. And the fact that you made it through means that promise is still ahead of you. So can you do a country boy one favor? Can you help me close my sermon? Can you turn to your neighbor and grab your neighbor by the hand and say, neighbor, I don't mean to be rude, but I got one question. Did you give God your yes? You don't need a yes for tomorrow. You need a yes for today. You need a yes for the next day. You need a yes for the next day. And you need a next for the day after that. You got to say yes to his will. Yes to his way. Yes to his plans. Yes when it's hard. Yes when you're tired. Yes when you don't understand. Because when you give God your yes, everything changes. When you give God your yes, doors start opening. When you give God your yes, mountains start moving. When you give God your yes, demons start trembling. When you give God your yes, miracles start manifesting. When you give God your yes, favor starts flowing. When you give God your yes, what was delayed becomes delivered. And so you don't know, but I made up in my mind that I'm gonna make it whatever it takes. I made up in my mind that nothing shall stop me from seeing my promised land. I might have to cry, but I'ma see it. I may have to walk through some lonely nights, but I'ma see it. I may have to encourage myself, but I'ma see it. I may have to pray my way through, but I'ma see it. I might have to wait a little longer, but I'ma see it. I may have to trust God, but I'ma see it. I may have to take losses, but I'ma see it. I may have to walk away from people, but I'ma see it. Because when you give God a yes, when you give God a yes, you don't get to miss your promised land. So high five with your neighbor and say, I don't know where you going, but I'm going to my promised land. I don't know what you come to do, but I came to get it, 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 get it to my promised land. So can you do me one favor? Can you help somebody see what it looks like when it gets to your promised land? Throw up your hands and say yes to your wills. Yes to your way. Yes, I'll trust you each and every day. But can I tell you about one person who gave God a yes? It was about 2,000 years ago. My Jesus said yes. He cried in Gethsemane, but he still said yes. He got whipped all night, but he still said yes. He got beat all day, but he still said yes. They hung him high, but he still said yes. They stretched him wide, but he still said yes. He hung his head, but he still said yes. And then he died, but I could hear, they told me, they said it was early one Sunday morning. He got up, and because he got up, I can give him a yes. And because he lives, I can face tomorrow. Because he lives, all fear is gone. Because I know who holds the future. Life is worth the living just because he lives. But can I tell you my testimony? It goes a little something like this. I seen the lightning flashing. I heard the thunder roll. I felt sin breakers dashing, trying to conquer my soul. But I heard the voice of Jesus telling me to fight on, preach on, serve on. And he promised never, never, never to leave me, never to leave me alone. It sounds like y'all got the same promise. So if you believe it, throw up your hands, throw your head back and say, I got it, I got it, I